Zombie games have certainly started to feel like to a penny for the past 10 years. Ever since Walking Dead started on TV, there certainly seems to be an influx of titles, including the undead. One of the best titles in the horde had to be Dying Light. Coming from developer of the Dead Island series, Dying Light took inspiration from that game and included a much more mature tone featuring parkour, and ever since its release in 2015, the game has featured loads of free and paid DLC that's expanded the game in so many ways. But now it's time for the much anticipated and long awaited sequel. So let's see how they did, shall we? Let's start off talking about the story. This one follows a new protagonist, Aidan Caldwell, a guy who is a pilgrim, who is like an outcast in society, who just does anything he can to survive. He gets into all sorts of scrapes and camp politics, which is going on with the different factions, but the overarching storyline is to help Aidan find his long-lost sister. They were separated in childhood, and we see bits of this in flashbacks. Aidan gets to know more as he meets up with the various factions, and try to help them out with their various issues. All I can say about the story is that, well, it's a story, but it's not a very good one. It's a competent one that has a good setup and a few twists here and there, but unfortunately the story is just so bland and boring. Its writing is a bit poor too, and the characters are frankly forgettable. Leading character Aidan is a typical gruff male protagonist 101, very unoriginal, and I had no interest in the story whatsoever. But you don't play Dying Light for the story, instead you play it for the gameplay, and Dying Light certainly does deliver. Taking the solid foundations from the original, Dying Light 2 builds upon it with new toys to play with and some nice refinements to the gameplay. When you first start off the game you do feel pretty weak, but once you start leveling up and gaining new abilities, it feels great, especially when you unlock the paraglider and the grappling hook. It allows for greater verticality and makes moving around such a joy. The parkour is easily the best thing about Dying Light 2. It feels so darn good. Definitely feels like it's been ripped straight out of Mirror's Edge, but greatly refined. Movement here is kinetic, fast, and jumping off and over buildings is such a great adrenaline rush. Sometimes it's just fun going out, running around in the open world, as it feels like a huge playground, especially when you unlock later parts of the map. As for the other big part of the gameplay, it's combat. And the original was a lot of fun with its brutal melee combat, and it was very much continues here. Gone is the guns of the original, which is a shame, and here we have a purely melee weapons focused only game. You have your typical mix of light and heavy attacks and block counters and that, and it's pretty fun here. There's a decent mix of weapons about, and obviously you can craft and upgrade new ones, which is great. Fighting human enemies is okay, though they do like to block a lot, so I just ended up drop kicking them off roofs as it made combat encounters with them much more easier. As for zombies, they pretty much succumb to your vast array of melee weapons, and it's always a blast to take down a load of them. It's just a shame that the enemy variety is a bit lacking, but the nighttime sections more than make up for it. If you played the original, you remember the night and day sections and how the tables turn, and this returns in the sequel. Daytime sections are really breezy, zombies are few and far between, and it's easy to take down, with the human enemies being the main enemies here. But once it hit night time, the zombies hit the streets in their hordes, and there's only one thing they want: you. And as soon as you see them, they're chasing after you across the environment, and it can be incredibly fun, creepy, and thrilling all at the same time. The main reason to play at night is obviously, like in the original, you gain extra XP so you can level up super quickly. The game also feels very much like Techland wanted to make it more of an RPG than the original, as when you level up you can assign points to create your own Aiden with upgrades and abilities you want. It's no Skyrim, but it's definitely dipping its toe into the genre, and it's not too bad of a thing. Another thing Techland has been talking about is dialogue choices. At specific moments in the game, it allows you to choose certain dialogue choices that affect the game, and it does in a way. But honestly, nothing game-changing really happens that what the trailers make out. There is moments where you can assign facilities to different factions, but it doesn't really change anything at all, to be honest. It does feel a bit like the Cyberpunk situation over again, with over-promising certain things. A lot has been talked about Dying Light 2's length. And I think in a bit of news before the game's launched, there was talk of the game lasting players around 500 hours to complete everything, which I think is a pretty big overestimate. To complete the mainline game, you're talking a good 30 odd hours to reach the game's conclusion, which is respectable enough. But as we know, there's loads of side missions to do. Some of them are decent enough, but unfortunately it does feel kinda quite like a rinse and repeat with its side missions, and mostly just feels like extra content for extra content's sake. That being said, you do get more of that same great gameplay, so if you want more excuse to end more zombies, then there you have it. Onto the presentation side of things, I'll be talking about the PS4 Pro version here, and for the Asian system, the game still looks pretty great. Visuals have certainly been scaled back with textures and foliage scaled back, but it still looks great, mainly because it was first set up for development on last gen systems. As for the frame rate, it's at 30 FPS, and for the most part it does stick at that 30 FPS for most of the time, only really dropping in very busy moments. But the biggest issue with the technical side of things is the multitude of glitches and bugs. Now, open world games and AAA games in general are well known for having a few, but Dying Light 2 does suffer quite a bit from funny ones to game breaking ones. I've had missions failing to progress a few times, characters not speaking properly, and falling through the game's world. It certainly isn't acceptable for a game to ship in this state. But to Techland's credit, they have shipped out a few patches that seem to be fixing a few of the problems, so hopefully by the time this review is out, most of the bad issues are gone. It's nowhere near as bad as Cyberpunk when it launched, but it's something you certainly need to be aware of. Onto the sound side of things now, and Dying Light 2 has a great original soundtrack that really does suit the game well. The tracks complement the gameplay well, and there's moments where you jump off buildings and the music turns down quiet and really builds up the tension incredibly well. Voice acting is here and it's your typical sounding stuff, a couple of decent actors here and there, but it's mostly just forgettable, but it does get the job done. Conclusion time now, and Dying Light 2 is more that same great gameplay the original is well known for, and this is a solid follow-up, featuring a great open world to explore full of stuff to do, the same superb parkour system, and hours of zombie slaying action. There's a lot of fun to be had here and plenty of content to get through, but unfortunately the game is bogged down by a forgettable story, repetitive and bloated side missions, and unfortunately quite a few technical issues. It's not the huge incredible game we were promised, but it's still a good time. So with that, I'm giving Dying Light 2 a 7.5 out of 10 with the title of good. As always, thank you very much for watching my review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you could like and subscribe, that'd be totally awesome. And as always, thanks for watching. Bye.